Hi, everybody. My name's Steve Bartlett, and welcome to Fightback. You haven't seen me in a while. I've been hiding from you. No, it's actually being an attorney makes me kind of busy, and because of that, I haven't had an opportunity to do the show. But I promised I would be back, and here I am. Before I begin, I'd like to talk about a couple things. I'd like to express my condolences to rock stars Eddie Money and Rick Ocasek, who passed away last week. And I found out yesterday that Cokie Roberts died yesterday as well. When I first started getting into politics, I used to watch the show This Week with David Brinkley every Sunday. That was one of the morning shows. And David was the cynical host, and he used to have, from the right wing, he had George Will, and from the left wing, he had Sam Donaldson, and they would go at it. But in the middle, they had Cokie Roberts, and I always really respected Cokie Roberts. I had no idea whether she was a Democrat or Republican. She was always the voice of reason. And I loved George Will and Sam Donaldson because, you know, they would mix it up. But they were gentlemen, and it was a different time. People don't act like that anymore. People don't have respect or engage in intellectual discourse, and we need to go back to that. We need to be more like Cokie Roberts and not be as angry or evil anymore. I mean, I can be angry and evil if I want because this is my own podcast, but I'm talking about the mainstream media, you know, and things like MSNBC or CBS News or Fox News. We need to start treating each other with more respect instead of trying to just, I don't know, be as larger than life so that we can get better ratings. And you know, so if you don't know who Cokie Roberts is, go on YouTube and watch some old newscasts with her, because that's the way journalists are supposed to be. So my condolences to her family as well. But what we're talking about today's episode is about left wing, right wing. Lately, I've been noticing on Facebook, because that's where I get my, I don't know, I read a lot of opinions and I can put my finger on the national mood. I've noticed that there's been a major change in the way Trump supporters are acting on Facebook. Before, they used to be talking about how much they despised Obama or Hillary Clinton. But now things have changed. Most of the posts I hear all the time now is about the left. Leftists are doing this, leftists are doing that, leftists are going to be destroying America, leftists hate America, leftists want us to be communists, leftists want us to be socialists like Venezuela, leftists want to bring back slavery, leftists are racist. Basically, if anything is evil, right now on Facebook, the right-wing propaganda machine, I guess, because these are, you know, it's not one person posting it. It seems like most of the people who I know who are Trump supporters, who engage politically, are saying basically the same rhetoric, basically attacking leftists. Anything bad is considered to be on the left. Anything that's good is considered to be on the right. And the problem is, most of the time, these people are using the terms left wing without really understanding what does left wing mean. Where did the term left wing versus right wing actually come from? Who created those concepts? Now, before I became the fighting lawyer that we all know and love, when I was in college, what I majored in was political science and philosophy. So this is the kind of thing they actually taught us back in college, and it's not that difficult to understand, and I want to explain it, because we have to have the same terminology. If people are just being fast and loose with terminology, then it's impossible to ever come up with consensus or have a legitimate debate. If people are just saying everything that's bad in the world is considered to be leftist without really defining what leftist actually means, we can never progress or have an intelligent debate or ever reach compromise. So I want to talk to you about where the term left versus right comes from, what it actually means, historically from a political scientist standpoint, okay? So the way we're going to begin is with the song Fight the Power by Public Enemy, in which Chuck D famously said, 1989, the number, another summer, sound of the funky drummer. And of course I'm a funky drummer as well, besides being an attorney, but that song was about revolution. 1989 was considered to be the big year, according to Public Enemy, when it comes to revolution. However, I want to talk to you about another revolution. Not 1989, but 1789. Okay? 1789 was the most radical year in world history, because 1789, the revolution that shocked the world, actually occurred. Now, people think of the American Revolution as being a revolution when it really wasn't a revolution. It was an anti-colonial war, more of a civil war than anything else. It wasn't a revolution. Okay? We didn't like kill the king or do anything like that. We broke away and declared our independence. It wasn't a revolution in the classic sense of revolution. The first real revolution in world history occurred in 1789 and is the famous French Revolution. Now, I want to talk to you about the French Revolution in case you don't know much about it. It's very complex. I ask anybody to read as much about it as possible because it's a really fascinating era of history. Or if you can't, read A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which is also a great book. But back in 1789, the King of France was Louis XVI. Okay? And Louis XVI was the last king of England at the time prior to the French Revolution. And, the kings of France at the time was almost a complete dictatorship. They were an absolute monarchy. Prior to Louis XVI, he had some reforms, but they were basically an absolute monarchy. Whatever the king said goes. He had complete power, complete control, and an obscene amount of wealth, similar to the way Saudi Arabia is right now, another absolute monarchy. But that was France back then. And what was kind of ironic is that the King of France, Louis XVI, actually supported the colonies in the American Revolution because England was their sworn enemy. And ironically, the American Revolution, which got aid from France to break away from England, this revolutionary spirit crossed the Atlantic. It actually helped his downfall because the revolution in America actually was a major influence on the revolution in France. So even though he attempted some reforms, the king was previously an absolute monarchy over in France, and ironically, helping Americans actually ended up causing his own demise as the revolution occurred in France in 1789. Now, the way society was in France at the time was society was transforming worldwide from the way it used to be in the Middle Ages to what became a rise of nationalism and the invention of countries, which were actually never really existed during the Middle Ages. So society was transforming from a feudal society in which the king had power, absolute power, and then his nobles owned the land and everybody else were poor peasants. There was no middle class. Capitalism didn't exist yet. That's what it was like during the Middle Ages. But things were transforming around the 17th century in the world, okay? And the way the Middle Ages occurred was that we had a very strict social class system with the king on top, the noble landowners and the aristocracy running and owning everything, and then poor peasants having absolutely nothing. That's how society was in France prior to 1789. Okay, they had that same old hierarchy. They were still set in the ways of the Middle Ages. So what we had in France at the time was something called the Old Order, and it was divided into three different groups, which they called estates. The first estate was the clergy. Now, the clergy back then was filthy rich. 10% of all land was owned by the Catholic Church back in 1789. And not only did they own land, but the church was actually able to impose taxes themselves, like the government would do on the population. So poor people had to pay taxes to the church back prior to the French Revolution. The second estate was the nobility, and they owned all the rest of the land. They were the filthy rich, and they had the powers, and they had the aristocracy, and they inherited their power and nobility. And they owned everything. That's how France actually was. Okay? And then there was something called the third estate, which was everybody else, the peasants and the middle class, which they called the bourgeoisie. That was what the third estate was. But all power, all money, all wealth, all land belonged to the first two estates and to the king. Okay? Now, what happened is England and France had wars going on for centuries against each other. In fact, the French and Indian War and the American War of Independence were actually small parts of a much larger, almost a world war going on between France and England. Because it wasn't just our colonies fighting England in the Revolutionary War, it was us and France fighting England, and France wanted the opportunity to stick it to their enemy, England. Okay? So after these wars, France ended up losing these wars. Well, now they actually won, America won its independence, but France lost basically the wars to England, and they were completely in debt. The country was impoverished. People were starving. People were dying. It was horrible what was going on in France at the time because of this endless war with England. So what happened was the King of England called something in 1789 in January called the Estates General to try to come up with reforms to try to fix this problem that was going on in England with people starving and the complete debt that was going on in the country. And that was very similar to what happened in our country with the Constitutional Convention. It was this big thing, 1,000 delegates showed up trying to reform what was going on. It completely failed. They weren't able to come up with anything except that third estate made up of the peasants and the middle class created something called the National Assembly, which was a republic government that they tried to accomplish in France at the time, and they actually invited the two other estates to join so that the rich and powerful could actually join with the commoners and the middle class and the poor people. Okay, now the king was against this idea, and this whole idea, which happened in June 1989, basically failed. It only existed for a month, this National Assembly. It failed. The people had had enough. They stormed the Bastille on July 14th, 1789, and the rest is history. The king was executed. Marie Antoinette was executed. And although a lot of the French Revolution had positive things that influenced the world, such as the Declaration of Rights of Man and of Citizens, what actually happened is that optimism ended with corruption and a reign of terror, and the mob became more powerful and started killing people who actually were for the revolution. And the guillotine became very common as people who were all over the place politically were just killed by the guillotine. Mass executions occurred. Dictatorship actually occurred, even though completely ignoring their concepts of this revolution. And eventually it ended with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and a complete dictatorship in France. Okay, the French Revolution failed. Okay? Now, why am I talking about this? Well, the term left wing and right wing comes from the French Revolution. Okay? Back when they had that National Assembly, those who supported the old order, who supported the king and the monarchy and the idea of the clergy and the nobles owning all power and having all the money, okay, they sat on the right of the leader or the president of the National Assembly. Okay? They sat on the right in this National Assembly. Those who wanted change, who wanted to move away from that monarchy, those who wanted to stop the whole idea of that middle age class system of the rich and powerful owning everything and the poor peasants having nothing, those people sat on the left of the chamber. And that's where left and right came from where they sat in the National Assembly in 1789. That's where left and right came from. And the right wing's views back in 1789 are different than what we think of as right wing today. Right wingers back then who were conservative believed in supporting the monarchy, believed in the concept of supporting the nobility and the clergy and landowners. In other words, they supported that middle-aged social structure. They believed in these concepts like authority, concepts like hierarchy, order, duty, tradition, and nationalism. Another thing that they believed in was something called reactionaryism. Reactionaryism is saying that we don't like the way society is right now, so not only do we not like it, we want to turn back the clock and go back to the way it used to be. If you've ever seen the movie The Handmaid's Tale, that's a reactionary government when they want to go back and create this puritanical country because they think that values have changed. So preserving old traditional values and this hierarchy and people in power, the rich and popular should maintain power, that was considered to be right-wing in the day. What was considered to be left-wing in the day were concepts like liberty, equality, fraternity, individuals having rights, making progress, reform, and internationalism. Those were concepts that grew out of the revolution, and they were considered to be left-wing ideas. The whole idea of capitalism at the time was considered to be liberal. Now, I know a lot of conservatives are going to freak out and say, wait a second, no, concepts like equality and liberty and all that, they're conservative ideas, they're not liberal ideas, but they're thinking of things in a non-historical setting. Okay? Right now, there's a very broad difference between left wing and right wing. Okay, there's the left wing and then there's a right wing. It's very broad. In American terms, the differences aren't that severe. Okay, and what is considered to be conservative in America right now, in the big scheme of things, on the big left to right spectrum, is still liberal. That's why our country is considered to be a liberal democracy. Not liberal in the way that, Jane Fonda is defining liberal, but in the big scheme of things. Because our country, whether conservatives like to admit this or not, our country in the big scheme of things, in the big spectrum, is a liberal democracy. Okay, in the big scheme of things, it's a liberal democracy. Americans do not believe in a monarchy. Americans do not believe in keeping the class system structured so that the rich maintain nobility. Okay, those ideas have gone away. Those were considered to be radical ideas at the time of the Revolution, and all the Americans who became our founding fathers were considered to be liberal in their day. Because at the time of the Revolutionary War, the liberals were the ones who wanted to break away from England. The conservatives, the right-wings, wanted to preserve us as part of England. They wanted to preserve their loyalty to the king. They did not want to break away from England. Okay? And the right-wingers back at the time of the Revolutionary War, okay, they sided with England. And then after the war was over, they ended up leaving the United States. Benjamin Franklin's son was a big supporter of that right-wing support of the monarchy of England and did not want us to break away from England, and actually fought against the colonies' attempt to get freedom. Okay? And what happened after the wars, a lot of people in America actually felt that way and were still loyal to the king and loyal to the old regime. And what happened is the people who lived in the South, who were right-wings and wanted not to break away from England, they ended up moving to Florida because Florida was not part of England at the time, and we were not one of the colonies that fought for freedom. And the northern people moved to Canada, mostly to like Nova Scotia area. Okay, so the loyalists, who were the conservatives at the time, left. And so our founding fathers were liberal for their day. Okay, I'm not saying that they're liberals the same way, Michael Moore's a liberal. I'm just saying that at the time that was considered to be liberalism. Our country is a liberal country. So if you look at the big scheme of things, okay, conservatives aren't really that right wing, okay, because it's very narrow. The difference between a left wing and a left wing American and a right wing American isn't that large. Okay, there's not as much difference between Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz. They believe in concepts that are jointly held, like the idea of democracy, the idea of a republic, the idea of individual rights, the idea of people being able to own private property, the idea that sovereignty belongs to the people and is not a gift from the king. These are American ideas, and they're all considered to be liberal ideas, and even American conservatives agree with it. Okay, I just want you to know that. Okay, if you look at the big scheme of things, where American politics are is to the left of the middle. Overall, even conservatives are like that. But there are extremes if you go a lot bigger. And you can actually look at the far left and the far right. According to the historical political science idea of left and right, at the very far left, the most extreme, are anarchists. And then you start drifting a little bit to the right. A little bit more to the right to anarchy are communist. A little bit to the right of communist are socialist. And then you get more closer to where we are in American politics, where you actually could have democratic socialists, who basically are socialists who don't believe in violence in order to get socialist ideals become law. Okay, so they believe not in violent change, but they still want the ultimate idea of socialism to occur. But then you go a little bit to the right, and then that's social democrats. They believe in democracy. They don't believe in socialism. They believe in individual private property, but they believe in a higher safety net. That's more of the Bernie Sanders and the Scandinavian concepts of the Scandinavian concepts of socialism, such as Denmark and Norway. Canada is basically a social democrat country as well. A lot of Europe is like that, especially the more liberal left-wing political parties. And then trade unions is something which is also a liberal idea. And then you start going more to center-left, and that's where most politicians are politically in the United States. The same thing if you go to the far right. On the far right, you have fascists, people like Hitler. That's the exact, complete authoritarianism, nationalism, not equality, maintain social structure, no individual liberties. Then you go a little bit to the left of that, which would be monarchy, then reactionaries, then imperialisms, and traditionalists. And then in the United States, the right wing, which is not as severe as right wings on the regular spectrum. Then you have what they call right libertarianism, regular conservatives, neocons, and Christian Democrats. Okay? So that's where we are. In the big scheme, we got anarchy on this side, and on this side, we have we have anarchy all the way to the left, and then we have fascism all the way to the right. Now, what happened, though, however, is that people are changing the terms so that no one understands what left and right mean anymore. Back in 1969, there was a guy named David Nolan, who was one of the founders of the American Libertarian parties. He created a chart and says that we should no longer consider it to be left and right, but instead we should have a separate axis. Left and right is dealing with economic freedom, according to David Nolan. According to David Nolan's idea, if you're for economic freedom, you are to the right. The less you believe in economic freedom, you go to the left. However, he did not just believe in having a left-right or east-to-west axis. He believed in having a north-south or up-and-down axis. So the higher you go to the north or up, you believe in personal freedom. The more you go down, you're against personal freedom. And because of that, there's 4 quadrants according to David Nolan's theories, and this is basically a libertarian scale in which a person could be for economic freedom and for personal freedom, or a person could be against economic freedom and against personal freedom, or a person could be for economic freedom but not for personal freedom, or a person could be for personal freedom but not economic freedom. And that's how the libertarian chart actually occurred, in which the more you go to the right, the more you believe in economic freedom. The more you go to the north, you believe in personal freedom, which created basically 4 categories. If you're for more economic freedom and more personal freedom, then you're more of a classic libertarian, like Penn Jillette happens to be, where Penn Jillette is for legalizing drugs, thinks people should be able to have an abortion if they want, but are against the concept of taxes and government regulation of businesses. And then you have the people who are for less economic freedom but more personal freedom, which are the classic liberals and progressives. We're for things such as freedom of speech, the right to have an abortion, right to privacy, right to your own religious beliefs, making drugs legal. However, they're for stricter regulations on concepts like private property and are for more economic regulations. The South. Then you have the people who are for less economic freedom and less personal freedom, and those people are basically fascists. And then you have the people who are for more economic freedom but for less personal freedom, and that's for law and order conservatives, people who like the idea of having low taxes but are tough on crime, who think that abortion should be legal and things like that. They're not as for civil liberties as much as people who are just pure libertarians are, okay? Now, that's another model that was created by David Nolan. And what's happened is that other people have been influenced by his model, and then they started doing other types of things which are very similar. Instead of having it be 2 axes, just having 1 axis in which it basically said that people on the left are against freedom, people for the right are for freedom. Basically making a complete libertarian argument, saying that the left is anti-libertarian and that the right is pro-libertarian. So under that idea, the most right-wing idea is anarchy. No government whatsoever. The most libertarian idea that could actually be, which is in conflict with the concept of left wing and right wing, in which anarchy is the most left-wing idea that a person can have. In the classic ideas, anarchy is on the one extreme, on the other extreme is fascism. On this new revisionist idea, which was created by libertarians, they believe that absolute freedom, which is anarchy, is the furthest to the right, and on the left is anything that's totalitarian. So according to them, on the left is fascism and communism in the vein of the Soviet Union. So that basically anything that's perceived as bad is considered to be left-wing according to certain segments in our community, and anything that's considered to be good is considered to be right-wing. And that's not the way it's supposed to be defined. That's not how political scientists or government philosophers have actually defined it. That's not what left-wing and right-wing actually means. And I have people on Facebook who say things like the liberals are for slavery, that liberals are all these crazy ideas, and it's like, that's not what liberalism is about or what leftists believe in. Okay? Here's a common example which shows how illogical they are. The one group that conservatives hate more than any other group is Antifa, which is short for anti-fascist, which is the enemy of fascism. Now, according to these conservatives, they believe fascism is on the left, but their enemy, which is Antifa, they believe is on the left as well. Well, then why is the extreme left fighting the extreme left? That doesn't make any sense. Okay? You're either fascist, but how could the opposite of fascism, which is anti-fascism, be the exact same thing? It doesn't make sense. Actually, Antifa is an anarchist group. They have no structure. They have no leaders. That's why no one knows anybody. I've never met anybody in Antifa because they really are leaderless. They hide their faces. They are an anarchy group. Okay? They believe in the exact opposite. So therefore, in that way, conservatives who believe in this left-right idea of the way the political spectrum should be defined, if they're anarchists, then these right-wing conservatives who think that the left is for totalitarianism, they should like Antifa, because Antifa is an anarchy group which, based upon their own libertarian scale, is conservative and right-wing, when the exact opposite is actually true. Antifa is extreme left-wing because they're anarchy. They're the exact opposite of fascism. And conservatives don't like the idea that if you go to the extreme in right-wingism, you get to totalitarian with fascism. They don't like the idea. They try to say that Hitler was a liberal or a leftist. However, every political scientist would say that no, on the left-right scale, Hitler was to the extreme of the right. I'm not saying, haha, Ted Cruz is a Nazi. No. Okay? Mainstream politics in America, whether it's to the left Democrats or whether it's to the right Republicans, there's not that big of a difference when you look at the big scheme of things between Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders. They all believe in the concept of a liberal democratic system. They all believe in the idea of popular sovereignty, individual rights, and a republic, and people's right to votes. Those are all historically considered to be part of the liberal concept. So if you look at the microcosm, the United States political spectrum is about this far, and it's kind of over to the left-hand side, but you're watching me backwards, so it kind of looks like it's on the right-hand side. But in the big scheme of things, you got the far left, which is anarchy and communism, and then on the far right, you have fascism. Okay? So, what we need to do is we need to start using the right terms instead of saying everything is bad on the left or everything's bad on the right. Because only if you can read, only if you're intelligent, can you engage in a proper political debate with somebody. So we have to start becoming more intelligent, more informed, instead of just repeating posts that we see all the time. I am sick of hearing how all leftists are bad. We're not. We do not believe in Venezuela. We do not want to turn our country into being the Soviet Union or under Mao Zedong. We don't believe in that. Okay? Hopefully I'll see you next week, but if I don't, I'll see you soon. Take it easy.